The chair beside Fiona Hartwell was empty, and Spencer Hartwell wanted the whole room to know it. He didn't say it quietly. He turned toward the gallery, toward the men in business suits he'd invited to watch, toward the clerk scribbling notes at the side bench, toward anyone whose eyes he could catch, and he laughed. Not the polite kind, the kind that carried. "Your Honor," Spencer said, loud and easy as a man ordering lunch, "my wife doesn't have representation. She told the court she was handling this herself." He let the pause breathe. "I think we all know how that's going to go." His attorney, Douglas Finlay, smiled into his notes. Fiona kept her eyes on the table. She had spent the 40-minute drive from Evanston, telling herself she was ready for this. She had read the filings. She knew the claim Spencer intended to make, that she was unstable, that she was unfit. That 9 years of raising their daughter, while he traveled and expanded his real estate empire, somehow added up to evidence against her. She knew the argument. She just hadn't expected how the courtroom itself would feel. How the dark wood panels and the fluorescent light and the gallery full of strangers would make her feel exactly the size Spencer always told her she was. Small, forgettable, not worth much without him. Behind Spencer, Vanessa Holt sat in the first row of the gallery. She wore a camel blazer and the expression of someone watching a performance they'd already seen the ending of. She didn't look at Fiona once. The judge, a woman in her 50s with silver reading glasses, and the patient expression of someone who had heard every version of this particular story, shuffled the documents before her. "Mrs. Hartwell, the court needs to confirm. You are proceeding without counsel today?" Fiona opened her mouth, and the courtroom doors swung open. Not the gentle push of someone arriving late, trying not to disturb. Both doors, decisively. The woman who walked in was 36 years old, 5'8", and wearing a charcoal suit that looked like it had been pressed an hour ago and would still be pressed an hour from now. She carried a leather litigation bag on one shoulder and a sealed portfolio under her arm. She walked like someone who had walked into rooms that didn't want her before and found it more inconvenient for the rooms than for her. Fiona didn't breathe, because she recognized the jaw, the way the woman held her shoulders slightly back, the particular shape of her eyes. She hadn't seen those eyes in 7 years. The woman approached the bench and set her portfolio down with a quiet, final sound. "Your Honor, I apologize for the delay. I'm Renata Morse, partner at Morse & Keller Litigation. I'll be representing Fiona Hartwell, effective immediately." The gallery erupted into whispers. Spencer's head turned so fast it was almost comical. His easy smile had not disappeared yet. It was still there, arranged on his face, but it had gone rigid, the way a mask goes rigid when the person behind it stops performing and starts calculating. Douglas Finlay leaned toward him and murmured something. Spencer shook his head once, sharply. The judge studied Renata over her reading glasses. "Counselor, the court wasn't notified. The notification is in your clerk's inbox as of 40 minutes ago, Your Honor. Filed electronically while I was in transit." Renata didn't look at Spencer. She didn't look at Douglas Finlay. She turned briefly to look at Fiona, and something passed between them, complicated and old and impossible to name in a courtroom, before she turned back to the bench. "The court will allow it," the judge said, after a moment that felt longer than it was. Fiona exhaled. Spencer did not. He leaned toward his attorney and whispered tightly, "Who is she?" Douglas Finlay's jaw had gone stiff. Because Douglas Finlay, unlike Spencer, recognized the name. Renata Morse had made partner at 31. She had argued 3 cases before the 7th Circuit in the last 4 years. She was not the kind of attorney you wanted appearing across the aisle from you on short notice, because short notice was when she was at her most dangerous. "She's trouble," Douglas said quietly. Spencer straightened his tie. "She just walked in off the street." Renata pulled out her chair and sat beside Fiona without fanfare. "You came," Fiona whispered. "I told you I would," Renata said. Fiona's throat tightened. Because Renata had never said that to her, not recently, not in years. Fiona had called Renata's office 14 months ago, when Spencer first filed for divorce and custody, and the call had gone to a voicemail she had been too ashamed to fill. She had assumed, she had been told, clearly and often, that Renata had moved on, that the estrangement was mutual. that there was no bridge left between them. She had been told a lot of things. "I'll explain everything," Renata said, eyes on the bench. "But right now, I need you to trust me." The hearing resumed. Douglas Finley stood and smoothed his jacket. "Your Honor, regardless of Ms. Morse's last-minute appearance, we intend to demonstrate that my client has been the sole financial provider throughout this marriage, that Ms. Hartwell voluntarily ceased employment 9 years ago, and that the minor child's stability is best served under my client's primary custody." Renata was on her feet before he had finished the last sentence. "Objection. Counsel is characterizing voluntary decisions without factual foundation. Ms. Hartwell did not voluntarily cease employment. She was systematically pressured to do so, and we have documentation." Douglas blinked. "That is a characterization, not a fact." "Then let's talk about facts," Renata said. "Starting with the 17 emails sent from my client's husband to her former employer at Callaway Group between 2017 and 2018, in which Mr. Hartwell informed the senior partners that his wife was experiencing psychiatric instability and required a leave that would become permanent." The room went still. Fiona heard her own pulse. Spencer slammed a hand on the table. "That's fabricated." "Your Honor," Renata said calmly, "the emails are authenticated and time-stamped. I can present them now, or the court can review them at recess." The judge's voice was measured. "We'll recess in 20 minutes. Proceed." Douglas shot Spencer a look that meant sit down and stay quiet. Spencer sat, but his face had changed. The ease was gone. What was underneath it was something harder and colder and less composed. Fiona looked at the back of his head, at the perfect haircut he had touched up 2 days ago, because he wanted to look his best in court, and thought about how she had once found that kind of attention to appearance reassuring. She had thought it meant he took things seriously. She understood now that he had only ever taken himself seriously. Everyone else had been a prop. They recessed into the marble hallway outside the courtroom. Spencer was in front of Fiona before she had fully stood up. "You think this changes anything?" His voice was low, meant only for her. "You think bringing your sister in here, your sister who you haven't spoken to in years, who didn't bother to show up when your mother died, you think that's going to work?" Fiona's hands were cold. She had learned over 9 years not to flinch when he stepped close like this. Flinching gave him something. "Step back, Mr. Hartwell." Renata appeared at Fiona's shoulder without raising her voice. "This conversation is over." Spencer looked at Renata with an expression of pure contempt. "Did she call you crying? Is this a guilt trip?" "My client doesn't answer to you anymore," Renata said, "and neither do I." Spencer called after them as they moved down the hall. Something about how this would cost more than Fiona understood. His voice echoed off the marble, and then they were far enough away that it became just noise. They stopped near a window overlooking the plaza below, the November sky white and heavy over Chicago. Fiona wrapped her arms around herself. Her coat was draped over a chair back in the courtroom. She hadn't thought to grab it. "He told me you stopped answering," Fiona said. Her voice was careful. She had been holding a lot of things carefully for a long time. "He said you called once after Mom died and that was it, that you didn't want anything to do with me." Renata turned to face her fully. There was something in her eyes that Fiona had almost forgotten, a particular quality of attention that had always felt like being seen rather than inspected. "I called you 47 times in 2019 and 2020. I texted. I sent letters. When you didn't respond, I sent one through a courier, certified mail to your home address." She paused. "Someone signed for it. It wasn't you. I have the signature on file." The floor shifted slightly under Fiona's feet. "He signed for it," Fiona said. "It wasn't a question. He signed for all of it." Renata's voice didn't harden, but it didn't soften either. It stayed the same even, clear tone. "I didn't find out until 3 weeks ago, when a former colleague of yours reached out to me directly. She'd seen the custody filing and said she was worried. That's when I started pulling records." Fiona pressed her fingers to her mouth. She was not going to cry in the hallway of the Daily Center. She had been telling herself that since she parked the car. But the thing about grief deferred is that it doesn't ask permission when it arrives. She thought about the years she had attributed to her sister's silence. The stories she had told herself. That Renata, with her career and her firm and her life, that had kept moving forward while Fiona's had narrowed, had simply outgrown her. That the estrangement was natural, that she had been too difficult, too needy, too much the kind of person that other people eventually drifted away from. Spencer had told her that too, not once, over and over in different words until she heard it in her own voice. "I thought you left me," Fiona said. Renata was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I know you did, and I need you to understand that was not an accident." A sob pressed against Fiona's ribs. She kept her lips together. Outside the window, a pigeon landed on the plaza ledge and then lifted away again, and she watched it go because she needed somewhere to put her eyes that wasn't her sister's face. "I don't know how to go back in there and hold it together when I'm this far gone," she said. "He's been telling me for years that I fall apart, that I'm unstable. I've been so afraid that if I cry in that room, they're going to say he was right all along." Renata stepped closer, not crowding, just close enough. "Crying isn't instability," she said. "It's evidence that you're human. And the only person who benefits from you believing those two things are the same is the man who taught you to believe it." Fiona closed her eyes. "What scares me most," she said after a moment, "is that I don't know who I am if I win this. I know what I'm fighting for. Lily. Lily. Obviously Lily, but I've been someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's problem, for so long I can't remember the rest of myself. Then we figure out the rest afterward." Renata touched her arm briefly. "Today we win, and then you get to decide who you are when the smoke clears." The judge's clerk opened a door down the hall and called them back inside. Fiona took a breath that was still unsteady, but was better than the one before it. She straightened herself. They walked back in together. The afternoon session had a different quality. Spencer must have felt it. The shift in the room's center of gravity, because the overconfidence that had filled the morning had been replaced by a tighter, more controlled version of itself. He was still well-positioned, still performing, but the ease was forced now in a way it hadn't been before. Douglas Finley approached the bench and presented a psychiatric evaluation. "Your Honor, Miss Hartwell underwent treatment for severe anxiety and emotional dysregulation in 2021, following an incident at a school function. We submit this as evidence of her ongoing instability and its potential impact on the minor child." Renata was on her feet before he finished. "Your Honor, counsel has introduced illegally obtained medical records. Those records were accessed without my client's consent, through a form she signed in 2021, under the belief that it was routine school paperwork." Additionally, she turned to face the room, and her voice carried something precise and unapologetic. "Those records document a single panic attack, one event, across a 9-year marriage, following months of documented psychological pressure applied by her husband. Calling that instability is not a medical opinion. It is a tactic." Spencer's face went red. Renata placed a series of documents on the judge's bench. "I'd like to introduce communications between Spencer Hartwell and 2 of my client's former employers, sent between 2016 and 2022. In these communications, Mr. Hartwell explicitly stated that his wife was emotionally unfit for professional settings, that she had been treated for breakdowns, and that rehiring her would be a liability to the firm. 3 positions she was qualified for and interviewed for were rescinded within days of these communications being sent." Fiona gripped the edge of the table. She had never gotten those jobs. She had assumed it was because she had been out of the workforce too long, because she had lost her edge, because, and she had believed this, she had genuinely believed this, she wasn't as capable as she used to be. Spencer pointed toward Renata. "She's fabricating this entire." "Your Honor." Renata slid one final document across the bench. "Email chain authenticated Mr. Hartwell to his assistant dated March 2022. I quote, 'She applied to Jensen & Cole again. Handle it the same way. I need her home.'" The gallery erupted. The judge's gavel came down. "Order." Spencer had his hand on Douglas Finley's arm. His mouth was moving. His color was wrong. For the first time, Fiona realized she was watching a man who had built his entire power on the certainty that she would never be in a position to see behind it. She was behind it now. Then Renata pressed a small remote, and the courtroom monitor blinked to life. An audio clip played. Spencer's voice, clear and unhurried, in what sounded like a phone call. "She's not going to fight. She doesn't have anyone. That's the whole point. When I married her, I made sure of it." A second voice. "What do you mean you made sure of it?" Spencer. "Her sister was the only family she had left. Once I handled that, she had nobody. You can't fight if you're fighting it alone." The courtroom did not erupt this time. It went completely silent, the way a room goes silent when something is said that cannot be unsaid. Fiona heard her own breathing. She heard the chair scrape as Spencer stood. "That is, you have no idea what context. That was a private." "It came from your own office server," Renata said, her voice quiet now, almost gentle in its certainty. "Time cemented 2018, shortly before my client stopped receiving word from her sister." The judge set down her pen. "Mr. Hartwell, sit down." He sat. But something had broken in the room. Not shattered. Broken the way ice breaks, the way a thing that looked solid reveals it was surface all along. Spencer's attorneys were whispering. A woman in the gallery had her hand over her mouth. A sound came from near Fiona's own chest, soft and unguarded, and she didn't try to stop it. She wasn't the strange part. She wasn't ashamed at all. Renata kept her eyes on the bench and placed her hand briefly on Fiona's arm. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. "Your Honor," Renata continued, "I have additionally recovered records showing a transfer of partial ownership in Hartwell Properties LLC to my client's name, executed in 2022 without her knowledge or consent. We believe this was done to shield Mr. Hartwell from a pending federal contractor audit. I am coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office, who have indicated their own proceedings are forthcoming." Douglas Finley's pen dropped onto the table. Spencer's head turned sharply toward his lawyer. "You told me she couldn't, you said." "Mr. Hartwell," the judge said, and her voice had shifted into the register of a person who has already made a decision. "The court is calling an extended recess. The documents submitted by Ms. Morse will be reviewed in their entirety. I am also contacting the Cook County Family Services Oversight Division." She looked at Spencer over the rim of her glasses. "I strongly suggest you speak with your attorney." The recess lasted 2 days. On the third morning, Fiona Hartwell walked into the Daily Center in a slate blue blazer she had borrowed from Renata, because her own clothes still felt like a costume from a life she was shedding. Her hair was down. She had actually slept, for 6 hours the night before, more than she had managed in months, and the sleep had done something to her face that no amount of telling herself to appear composed had ever accomplished. She looked like herself. She had almost forgotten what that looked like. Spencer was already seated when she entered. He did not look at her. He did not make jokes. The easy confidence that had filled the room 3 days ago had been replaced by the specific silence of a man whose attorneys had spent 48 hours telling him exactly how bad things were. Vanessa Holt was not in the gallery. The judge took her seat. "The court has reviewed the submitted materials and has consulted with relevant state and federal bodies. We are prepared to issue a ruling." She turned a page. "Based on evidence of financial misconduct, deliberate interference with the respondent's professional opportunities, unauthorized transfer of property ownership, and documented psychological manipulation constituting a pattern of coercive control, the court finds as follows." Fiona's fingers were laced together on the table. She did not move them. "Primary physical custody of Lily Hartwell is granted to her mother, Fiona Hartwell, effective immediately. Mr. Hartwell will have supervised visitation, pending the outcome of the Family Services Review. Ms. Hartwell is further awarded restitution for demonstrable lost income resulting from documented employment interference, and full legal ownership of the property transferred to her name in 2022 will be resolved in her favor pending federal review." Spencer's chair scraped. His lawyer caught his arm. Additionally, the judge continued as though Spencer had not moved. "The court is forwarding the financial documents and audio recordings to the Illinois Attorney General's office. Federal investigators have indicated their own proceedings are forthcoming." "This is," Spencer began. "Mr. Hartwell," the gavel came down, light but final. "You are dismissed." He stood for a moment at his table, the way a person stands when the ground they were certain of has rearranged itself, and they haven't fully understood their footing yet. Then Douglas Finley said something quietly, and two men in suits who were not court staff stepped forward from near the door, and Spencer Hartwell understood. He did not shout this time. He did not perform. He simply looked at Fiona, for the first time all morning, and she saw it. The moment a person realizes the story they have told about themselves is not the only story that exists. That the version in which he was always the indispensable one, always the one who mattered, was a story that required her to stay small, and she had stopped being small. She held his eyes and said nothing, because there was nothing left that needed saying. Then the men in suits stepped closer and she looked away, not because she had to, but because she was finished. Outside the courthouse, the November air hit cold and clean. Reporters had gathered on the steps, and Fiona stood at the top of the stairs, while Renata handled brief statements below. The lake was visible in the distance on a clear day, gray-blue and enormous and indifferent in the way only very large things can afford to be. The city spread beneath it, anonymous, ordinary, full of people living lives she had nothing to do with, and somehow that felt like freedom rather than loneliness. Lily was at school. Fiona had 40 minutes before pickup. She thought about how she would tell her daughter that they were going to be okay. She hadn't known, until this morning, that she would be able to say that honestly. She had practiced saying it anyway. The way you practice things you hope will become true. It occurred to her now that the practicing might have been its own kind of courage. Renata came up the steps and stood beside her. "She's going to ask me why you were gone for so long," Fiona said. "Lily, she's 7. She's going to ask why she doesn't have an aunt." "What are you going to tell her?" Fiona thought about it. That some people try to make you think you're alone when you're not, and that the ones who actually love you have a way of finding you, eventually. She paused. "Is that too much for a 7-year-old? "She sounds like a smart 7, Renata said. They stood side by side on the courthouse steps, the way they had stood on their parents' porch steps as children, watching summer thunderstorms move across the Chicago suburbs. Fiona remembered it suddenly and specifically. The smell of rain on hot pavement, Renata counting the seconds between lightning and thunder, the way even storms felt manageable when someone was counting beside you. There were a lot of years between them now. A lot of silence that hadn't been silence but had felt like it. A lot of letters someone had signed for that she never read. But the sister who counted through the storms was still there, and Fiona was still there. And some things turned out to be more durable than the people who tried to break them. "Come with me to pick up," Fiona said. "She doesn't know yet that she has an aunt." Renata pressed her lips together in the way she always had when she was trying not to show how much something mattered. "Yeah," she said. "Okay." They walked down the steps together into the cold, bright afternoon. Fiona Hartwell had spent 9 years making herself smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of who she should be. She wasn't sure yet what full size looked like, but for the first time in a long time, she intended to find out. And she was going to have someone beside her while she did.